For me, it's really rare to find a Black person, even here in America, who does not have some type of religious background. And as a gay person or a queer person, I've oftentimes heard a lot of Black queer people who walked away from church because of the homophobia, the hypocrisy. We all know some of the things that go down in the churches, from the pastors and the choir people, the deacons who are on the down low. And so it's a hypocrisy and also lack of acceptance that turn a lot of people off. And speaking of online dating and real Black men, how do you feel about the fetishization of the Black man? It's always like a dark skinned, masculine, top Black man. It's always like on top of the food chain, and you're just cornered into a box and you're not allowed to be anything but that box itself. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on Let's Talk About Us with Uche. I am your host, Uche. Thank you so much for joining today. If you're returning, thank you. If this is your first time listening on podcast, please make sure to download, share with your friends and family. If this is your first time on YouTube, also please share with your friends and family. And please do not forget to hit that bell notification so anytime I upload a video, you'll be the very first to be notified. Thank you and welcome. Today, I have the honor to host someone very inspirational to me. I got the opportunity to not formally meet, but we met virtually a few months ago. I also had the privilege of being invited to his platform, and he interviewed me, one of the most profound people I've met in 2022, Mr. Erick Woodby. Thank you so much for joining today. Could you please introduce yourself?
Well, thank you so much for having me and for that great introduction. No pressure.
You want to tell the audience a little bit about you, or you want me to spill the tea?
The platform that you were talking about is our Black Gay Diaspora podcast, which is for LGBTQ plus, Black LGBTQ plus professionals across the globe, sharing about their lives and their professions in their respective countries. And yes, I was also very honored to speak with Uche a couple months ago. And I've interviewed people from different places in the US and the United Kingdom and Sweden, recently in Italy. Didn't know there were Black gay people in Italy. So it's been a really exciting journey, coming up on almost 2 years in April.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining today. And yes, there are Black gay people in Italy and all around the world. So I really do appreciate the work that you do. As we've talked about in the past, my platform is centered around spirituality and, preaching the oneness of all. And homosexuality or LGBTQ advocacy, specifically to Black and African people, is just like a subset of what I do, not the entirety of what I do. But seeing someone like you who is focused on that, our Black gay diaspora, just bringing awareness to Black people in the diaspora who are queer, I think that's quite admirable. And this is one of the things that I loved about meeting you last year, and also feeling so honored to be on your show to, share my story and connect with someone like you. It definitely as an incentive, reinforcement for not just me, but for more people like us to live our truest selves.
I agree. And it's very much for me about community.
Of course.
For me, it started with, I spent most of the last 3 years in Sweden, between Sweden and the UK, actually. And this just came out of a desire just to find out, first of all, those of us who are in Europe. And then it just kind of fanned out from there. And then it just brought up other questions, which I love your platform, is that you really challenge us to, look at ourselves, but also look in the ways that we can positively influence the world everywhere.
Of course. Now you're from the US, right?
Yeah.
Los Angeles, California.
I'm actually from Phoenix, Arizona, but I lived in LA
Right.
for a long time. And so, yeah, Phoenix is my hometown, but LA is where actually I spent most of my life, because I moved there as a young adult. And I've been here, like I said, mostly in Europe for 3 years, and currently in Brighton in the UK since late September of last year.
Okay. And you're I know you're currently in the UK right now, but you did live in Sweden. That's where you're based right now, right?
This is where I would like to be based. I'm a
Okay.
digital nomad at the moment, doing freelance work, but the ultimate goal is to settle as a resident in Stockholm. Although I've been here in Brighton, and I came here through Pierre Monterville, who was my episode 5 guest. He always said, you should come visit Brighton, which is considered like the San Francisco of the UK. And I have to be honest, I do really like it here. I like the vibe here. It's very chill. It's a seaside beach town. So it's very walkable. I love the fact that I don't need a car. I can just walk just about anywhere if it's not raining.
And do you have any plans to move back to Sweden?
Because I'm a nomadic person at the moment, I have to leave after a certain time. So I plan to return to Sweden in the early spring.
Okay. Do you have any plans to come back to America anytime soon?
Not to live. I was back last year for 7 months, the first part of the year, and it was good because I got to see family and friends and actually got to travel a bit more across the country just through not seeing people for a couple of years. When I came back and people knew I was back in the US, they're like, you have to come see me. So I was briefly in Texas in San Antonio. And then a friend of mine, originally from Atlanta, he moved back there years ago, and I got to see him. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. And then, of course, LA and Phoenix, and then seeing some family on the East Coast in Maryland and New York.
Okay, that's good. And whenever you're back in the US, it would be nice to see you in person. Or if I'm in Europe or whatever country you're going to be in, it'd be nice to put an actual physical face to the name.
I
You
look
seem like a
forward to it.
pretty cool person.
Same here.
So anyway, Eric, welcome to my show, and thank you for having me on your show when you did. I listened to that episode so many times because it's by far one of my favorite guest interviews that I've done. Like where I went to somebody else's show. I feel like I poured out my heart, my body, and my spirit. I'm going to try to attach a link down below for anyone who is interested in listening to that episode. Like I said, it's one of the most profound episodes that I've done where someone invited me to their show. I remember something that you mentioned on that show is when you came out of the closet, it felt right to come out, but then it didn't really feel so right. It's like, now what? I feel like this is something that a lot of us struggle with. Me personally, I've definitely made peace with my sexuality. A whole lot of things about me, I've definitely made peace with that for a long time. But then there's always that now what feeling that comes out. And I feel like a lot of that comes from the fact that a lot of us don't even know what being queer is, being gay, lesbian, bisexual, because there's not a whole lot of positive image on queerness out there. And the education that is out there is so entertainment driven and also so white centered. So a lot of people like us, black people in diaspora, or Africans in diaspora, we don't fit in there. Now we're dealing with racism, we're dealing with homophobia, we're dealing with other struggles of being black and queer, especially here in the West where we are not the majority, we're not the preferred. Do you want to touch up on that as to how that felt when you first came out?
Yeah, actually, I just had a similar conversation this past week, but I think it was just a community. I was hoping to instantly find a community based on media, based on what I had been seeing on television and a few films at the time when I came out in the late 90s. But to your point, yeah, I was kind of caught up in it for the first couple years, like just the whole thing of I was admitting to myself that I'm gay, and I was really riding on that high. But once that started to die down, and I started to really focus on the world around me at the time, because I didn't plan to move to West Hollywood. I just so happened I was I had to move. I was in a living situation that I wanted to get out of, and so I found a place in West Hollywood. And there's some great, in some ways, community there. But yeah, like I said, after a couple of years, once the dust started to settle and I started to really focus, I was like, well, where are the other Black gay, specifically at the time, men? And then thankfully, I had a friend at the time who gave me a proper tour of LA gay life and took me to, there was a club for years that was, I think, one of the oldest clubs in the US for a long time. There's a documentary, or there was for a time on Netflix, there's called The Catch. And he took me there. And that was the first time I like saw a sea of, beautiful, gorgeous Black men and women, LGBT Black community. And just other pockets of LA. But yeah, that was fine and that was cute for a while. But and not to say I didn't at the time like to go out and have a good time, but I wanted something more meaty, more solid, not as superficial as it can be in club culture, regardless of where we come from. And so yeah, I was just kind of hungry for that. And I love reading those types of things. I'm a writer, but I just wasn't really finding it, or it took me a while to really find my people.
Hmm. And how old were you when you came out and started this journey?
I was 28.
28. So would you say that's a bit later or early?
Oh, good question. I thought it was late. Some people I know come out a lot later. I mean, you're younger than I am. I know, as the generations move forward, we tend to come out a lot younger. I It was more personal for me, not so much that I couldn't have come out earlier, because actually a friend from high school came out right after, or I knew he was gay right after high school. So there were definitely people in my life who were coming out, and I had a friend in college who was out as a gay man. But at the time, I just wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to sit still long enough to accept that part of myself. And unpacking things over the years, some of it was, I didn't really grow up in a consistently religious background, but definitely not being told that gay is wrong, but that it wasn't the ideal, and those types of things, and more of the pressure on myself, because I was this kid who was really determined to be the best little boy in Arizona. And I was good in school and I was very book smart, but being gay didn't really fit into who I thought I should be.
I definitely resonate with a whole lot of those, and I'm sure a lot of people listening and watching right now definitely can relate. Yes, community building is something that is very important, not just for queer people or black people, just for humans in general. I'm sure you've heard this phrase, no man is an island, because we're all joined, we're all connected one way or the other. And of course, when you're a minority, especially in this part of the world, especially a double, triple minority, in the sense of being a woman, being black, being queer, being immigrant, and things like that, it gets a bit trickier building community. And I remember one of the episodes that you did in your own podcast, I believe, Finding My Voice.
Finding my voice as a black gay man.
Yes, finding my voice as a black gay man. A couple of things that you mentioned there is how it wasn't until recently that you started being proactive and being not assertive, but speaking up for yourself and taking charge of your life and doing your thing. And then you shared some of the things, in your childhood and also the corporate job that you worked. How people overlooked you. Obviously, I would guess that some of that is possibly who you are to a certain extent. Like some people are more naturally more, I don't want to say passive, but more mellow. A lot of things don't bother them per se. But would you also say a lot of that, what influenced that mentality is also how you were raised?
Yeah, that's another good question. It was a combination of the two. I grew up in a family where, my immediate family, we're all pretty, never thought of us as mellow. I always thought of us as just quiet. But yeah, I guess kind of a mellow set. People that were most comfortable, or I should say, I most comfortable in smaller group settings. I do love to talk, and that's been one of the gifts of this platform, is that I love to discuss, but I never considered myself and a super gregarious person. But yeah, my family life, we were pretty insular. We pretty much kept to ourselves. We also moved around a lot, which I think added to it, because I never really felt I was in a community long enough to kind of get to know myself in some ways.
Okay. How would you say your mental health, or at least your state of mental health, was growing up? And the reason why I ask this is because obviously mental health is a very important part of our own being. And I've seen in all of my travels, talking to a lot of queer people in general, not just black and African queer people, a lot of their mentality as to how they view queerness or view themselves in the space of queerness is a reflection of how they were raised growing up, where there's always this big push on patriarchy and heteronormativity and heavy religiosity that perpetuates their own mental health demise, if that makes sense. Would you say that's definitely something that's applicable in your situation growing up, where some of the norms in your household caused a rift in the way you perceived yourself, not just as Erick, but also as a black queer man, and also how you've grown to see yourself and see the world today?
I mean, within the home, I was, for the most part, I had to get good grades. I had to present in a certain way, and I'm not regretful of that at all. I'm really grateful for being encouraged to focus on that. As far as being a boy, or being a boy becoming a man, I don't remember being told that I had to be like hyper masculine, but it's definitely was some of that there. I was very bookish, and I think that in some ways protected me, because I was always considered a smart one, or like when I look back on some of the people that weren't necessarily friends, but I think they were kind of protectors, these boys who were usually my age or a little bit older, who were more assertive, they would kind of say, oh, he's cool, Erick's all right. Because I was always very quiet and I was very shy. But yeah, within the home, as far as masculinity or going to school and getting to become more aware of what's expected of a boy, yeah, I think that played a part in it. I didn't think of myself as gay as a child. I was aware every now and again of things that I shouldn't say. Like, I remember at 7 years old being near these girls in second grade who were kind of considered the pretty popular girls and overhearing them talk about this new boy in class, Byron, and they were like, oh God, he's really cute. And in my mind, I said, oh, I think he's cute too. And then I panicked because I was like, oh, did I say that out loud? So for the fact that even though I didn't think of myself being gay or didn't even know what that was at that age, the fact that I was afraid that I had said that out loud says something. So I was definitely getting fed something.
Hmm. Would you say you grew up in a stereotypically religious household where going to church every Sunday or Saturday for some people who go to church on Saturdays was a norm?
No, I come from that as far as extended family. My mother came from that. Her father died when she was a kid, and I think their mother kind of used the church to help raise them, which in some ways is good because that's community. I grew up with my stepdad, and so he came from that background too. But as far as our religious upbringing, or at least mine when we were coming up, or when I was coming up, we went to church once in a blue moon. It would be like maybe once every 2 or 3 years, and I never understood it until I got older. I never asked because they're both gone. But I think when we did go to church, I think it might have been guilt, or maybe family members were saying you should be taking these kids to church. But yeah, I didn't really grow up with that, and as far as that expectation or going to church or never having a church home, I didn't have that. No,
Okay, so would you say your family was considerably progressive?
I hadn't thought of them that way.
Well, especially in terms of religion and social norms and traditions.
I guess so. Around religion, I remember
Okay.
being around the age of 12, 13, and realizing that I had not been baptized. And I did ask my mother why I wasn't baptized. And she said, because I want you to have that choice. I don't want to put that on you. And I do appreciate that for her. And when I did get baptized when I was 17, I didn't do it for the right reasons. I did it out of spite because, part of my home life, my stepdad was we were not close, and it was my way of proving to him that I was a good person, I guess.
Mm, I see. The reason why I brought that up is because obviously religion in today's day and age is a big part of who we are as a people, especially black people. I'd actually argue that it's worse in Africa, Chaz. That's a whole nother conversation. And for me, it's really rare to find a black person, even here in America, who does not have some type of religious background. And as a gay person or a queer person, I've oftentimes heard a lot of black queer people who walked away from church because of the homophobia, the hypocrisy. For any Christians or religious person who's watching, I'm sure when you were in church or if you're still in church, we all know some of the things that go down in the churches, from the pastors and the choir people, the deacons who are on the down low and things like that. So it's a hypocrisy and also lack of acceptance that turn a lot of people off. And I'd actually argue that part of that is in lack of understanding of what spirituality, at least a spiritual essence of what church or religion is supposed to bring out in people. Hence why people seem so close-minded and homophobic. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think I was somewhat aware of that, not hearing that because again, we didn't go to church that much. I had an aunt, my mother's sister. She didn't really go to church, but as far as my upbringing, she was the closest to me of hearing that because she was very much into the Bible, Christianity and those types of things. I think I learned more about it as I got older. Definitely, I had strong opinions, not positive opinions about people who were religious. Whenever I would visit my aunt, she always had Christian television on, and that was a challenge for me because I sometimes saw things or perceived things that were contradictory to what these people, how they were actually living their lives. I didn't become aware of, the contradictions or the conflicts about being gay in the church until after I came out, and I started to meet especially Black gay men who were conflicted because of growing up in religious homes, and very much being Christians and being spiritual people, but being conflicted because of the rhetoric that they had grown up with.
I'd say that a lot of that confliction is because, again, once again, I feel like people don't understand what religion is supposed to do. Religion is supposed to take you to spirituality, which is the oneness of all, which is also why I focus on what I focus on in terms of spirituality. And it's also why I like the episode that you did with the guy from the Pride in the Pew. I don't remember what episode that was, but I felt his energy. Of course, he's more religious with it, he's more church with it, but it's essentially the exact same thing. You can be a queer person and serve God. We are all God's children. God manifested every single one of us perfectly in God's own way. So for us to now turn our backs from that and create God in man's image, I feel like a lot of people worship man-made image of God, reprimanding people because of their sexuality or whatever it is, without realizing that we're all fallible creatures who have been brought into this world perfectly and necessarily to serve God in different ways. So I feel like that disconnection has turned off a lot of queer people to walk away from church without realizing that you can still be a part of the church, or not even necessarily go to church, but serve God in your own way that doesn't necessarily conform to the religious norms, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I'm not a religious person. I've tried church or, religion in my adulthood. I am definitely, I believe, a spiritual person. To your point, I think it's about positive energy transference, in every way, whatever way that can be manifested. I'm definitely a proponent of that. And that could be through Christianity and through the other religions. But yeah, I like how you put that. It's definitely, I think, spirituality. It's connecting to energies that are feeding oneself in a positive way and also affecting other people in a positive way. And I've definitely been in churches where I sense, because people think I'm a Christian, I'm just focused on that because that's the only one I really know somewhat about. I just feel like it's people being an elite country clubs. That's how they treat religion. Is I'm part of this country club. You're not a member, therefore you don't belong, or if you don't follow the rules that I think you should follow, then you're going to hell. And a lot of that stuff that they talk about, I don't think, and that's something I like that you quote actually from the Bible, because especially around the policing of women's bodies, they talk about a woman should wear a skirt this length or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's generational. I mean, there was a time where if a woman showed her knee or her ankles, she was going to hell. So really do your research. That's what
Yeah.
I would say.
One of the things that we struggle with, like I mentioned earlier, we both mentioned earlier, is finding who we are, making peace with who we are, and community building in terms of chosen family. And for anyone who's been watching me for a while, chosen family is something that I've talked about a lot. That is very important. Like I said earlier, no man is an island. How would you? And this is a problem. This is a big problem on its own. I've mentioned this in previous episodes, how a lot of gay people or queer people get together. There's not a whole lot of substance joining them together. A lot of young, especially young people, maybe even older people, but I see this a lot in young people. When they get together, I feel like the only thing that they have in common is just that they're queer, or maybe because they're Black and queer or African and queer, but there's not a whole lot of deep connection between them, where beyond that stereotypical, superficial, look at me, look at, talking about boys and things like that, right? What advice would you give that you've possibly implemented in your own life and finding yourself and building that community of chosen family, especially for younger people who are coming out of a closet, or at least considering taking that leap of faith and walking into their own light?
I think it's about peer pressure a lot of the times. I could say in my own past why I tried to do certain things because it was expected because I was gay, and then later because I was Black and gay. I Yeah, it's that. I think part of it too is, as far as our community, generally speaking, and then specifically as Black LGBTQ plus people, is that this is still relatively new, us openly building community. So we're still trying to find out what this is. And, there's still the reality that although, yeah, it's a lot easier to come out today, it's still, I don't think, uncommon that we have to wait until we're adults or young adults to do that, or to do all the things that you said, to acknowledge within oneself that, hey, I'm attracted to the same gender, or I express my gender expression this way. And that's why I think we lag behind a little bit, not because we're less intelligent or less emotionally mature, it's because we have to put that on pause. Most people start being able to openly do that when they hit puberty. Most of us still can't do that. So I would say, yeah, just maybe give yourself permission to stumble sometimes, because that happens, and that's just part of the human condition anyway. I think it seems to be a lot easier because of the internet, because we can look up things. And if you have something that you like or don't like, it's okay to acknowledge those things. Like anything, that people who try to wrangle you to do things because of peer pressure, it's okay to say, you know what, I know you like that, but that's not what I like, or this is what I like. And, please respect that.
I definitely do agree with you on every single point. And this definitely also affects our dating life as well. That lag that you mentioned. I always say that a typical 25-year-old gay man is equivalent to a 15-year heterosexual because of all the social, mental, psychological learning process. We're a bit slower with it because of lack of acceptance. So I definitely do agree with that. How has that lag affected you in your own dating life? And what advice would you, here's my, and what advice would you give to a younger person like myself, or even much younger, who, once again, is on the verge of coming out of a closet and trying to navigate through finding who they are, working, paying taxes, being an adult, learning about queerness, and also looking to share their life in an intimate way with the one or the special person?
I'm going to turn the camera off
Spill the tea, Eric.
No, I think it's a process. I think
Okay.
it's a process. I think sexuality in general, yeah, I'm gay, but sexuality in general, regardless of what my orientation is, it's a process of finding out what I like, what I need. I think that's more important a lot of times, is discovering what I need and being okay, and admitting that to myself, and admitting that to potential partners, or to the potential partners, that this is what I need. I know this is what you have done with other people, or this is how you've expressed your sexuality, but this is what I need. Definitely communication, especially around intimacy, be it emotional or sexual, is that it's okay to talk about it. I know sometimes in the heat of the moment we can just get caught up in things, but it is okay to pause and say, you know what, let's just talk for a little bit, even if it's something casual. It's definitely okay to pause and say, this is what I need, or this is what I like, or this is what I don't like or need, and to do it in a respectful way, so that you're not um, hurting the other person's feelings, because we're both beings who have emotions and feelings.
Of
I don't know
course.
if that answers your question.
No, it does actually. It answers it perfectly. My next question is, okay, so let's say a scenario where a younger person, for example, or anyone actually, I focus a lot on the younger people so we can start coming out a lot quicker. So we can try to savor as much opportunities as possible and not do it later. But this is something that it could be applied to anyone. Let's say, for example, someone is coming out of a closet. They are making peace with who they are. Of course, it's a process, like you said, but they're relatively comfortable with who they are, and they are in the dating scene, and then they fall in love with someone who is still closeted or down low. What do you think about that? Dating someone who is closeted or on the down low. Do you think is advisable? How do you think that could affect both their dynamics?
I haven't had that first-hand experience. I mean, before I came out, I have some history with people who um, to this day have not acknowledged certain things or certain experiences. But as far as my experiences as an out gay man, I haven't had that where I've actually dated somebody who's been closeted, or on the down low. But I would say that, just again, go back to, it's okay to respect yourself. My first thought when you say that, or as I'm processing that question, is I don't think it's any different than maybe dating somebody who is in a relationship, regardless of whether it's with a man or a woman, and you're on the side. Think about like how that will affect you long term. Um, you know, is it possible if this person is with you as a closeted person, and if you are able to have that conversation with them, like how long is this going to last? And if they say that this is never going to change, you're always going to be in the shadows, and give
Mm,
yourself permission to say, you know what, I think I might want something more than this, or something more open, and it's okay to step away. And I know it's easier said than done, because when emotions get involved, it
of
gets
course.
very tricky.
Of course. I totally do agree with that. I personally, I don't have an issue with closeted or down low people. I do understand from a very logical perspective. I understand it. And I've never really liked to be the type of person to pressure people to come out of a closet, you know. A lot of people that I know are still in the closet, and they confide in me because they know the kind of person I am. I would respect it, and so on and so forth. But I also do understand the burden, you know, the suppressed burden, the suppressed internalized homophobia attached to it. And I also do understand how quite toxic it can be. And from a lot of people that I know who are out and about, who have gotten into relationships with closeted men, I would confidently say about 80 to 90% don't really have a whole lot of positive things to say. And which is also understandable because community building, you know, like you want to, life is stressful as it is right now. You want to be around people who can strengthen you and you strengthen them, especially as a black queer person. And if your significant other, your better half, as some people will call it, is not even comfortable with who they are, how are they going to catch them and catch me? So it's sort of like walking on one leg, if that makes sense. But I do understand that, you know, a lot of that, like I said, is internalized pressure, internalized homophobia, mental health. A lot of times is also subpar. My question to you is, do you think that we are doing enough within not just the LGBTQ community? Because when I say the LGBTQ community, a lot of it is white dominated. But within the black LGBTQ community, do you think we're doing enough to push for mental health awareness, where people can actually feel comfortable being themselves, coming out, having these conversations, not just within the black context, but within the black LGBTQ? Are we doing enough? Do we have enough resources, especially for, say, like an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid in college who may not necessarily have the luxury of having formed those chosen families, or even have the luxury of having mom and dad to lean on, where they can pursue their own path for themselves.
I think we're on the road to it. I mean,
Okay.
you're somebody who's being open about it. I interviewed another person, Sean Wallace, here in the UK and London, who's, being more vocal about it. I think we're on the road to it. I think similar to us lagging behind in a general sense to the straight community, because we usually oftentimes have to come out later. As far as specifically us as Black people within the queer community, we're still a little bit behind. And I've become more vocal about this, is that because we don't have the support of our Black communities a lot of time, and then also the larger LGBT community, um, we're still getting our we're still finding our way in that. And it's not a blame, but it definitely is a cause and effect that we're not getting that support a lot of times openly, or even behind the scenes, from those two communities. I'll just say I think we're on the road to doing that. And I think, like I said, you are one of the people I'm really thankful that are leading the charge for that, because mental health is important. Yeah, coming out for me was initially about, oh, I'm attracted to my same gender, but if I find the man of my dreams tomorrow, if I'm not okay within, it has no value.
Amen. I definitely agree with that. Speaking of coming out, a lot of closeted or people who are on the verge of coming out men, black men that I've met, I've noticed one of the biggest concerns for them that they have in coming out is the whole association of LGBTQ or gay queerness with extreme femininity. Of course, this is not to disrespect or demean men who are naturally effeminate. those men do exist, irrespective of sexuality. They could even be straight or bisexual, whatever, right? But I feel like there's this oversaturation and overrepresentation of queerness, especially black queerness with femininity. And like I've always said on my platforms, I believe that the effeminate gay men are actually minorities, which is why it's easier to spot them. But the vast majority of gay and bisexual men are as masculine as you and I. What message would you give to closeted men or gay men who their issue coming out is because they don't want to be associated with an effeminate, flamboyant man, and have people put them in that box of where it's a threat to their being and a threat to their own masculinity.
Starting with myself personally, it's accepting the parts of myself that may not be deemed as traditionally masculine,
Uh-huh.
and learning and accepting that's cultural in some ways, especially being here in Europe. As you know, in the States, we can tend to be more hyper masculine in some ways, and finding out that just because I may cross my legs a certain way or like to cook, I don't like to cook, but that it's a process, or an education for myself personally. I think accepting that does exist. And also, there are some men that's just innately who they are. And for that reason, sometimes they're on the front lines fighting for the DL men to discreetly hook
Mm.
up online. You know, that person is on the front line so that you can not show your face on an app. So we can't ignore the fact that a lot of the men who are considered effeminate are the ones who are leading the charge a lot of times to fight for change because they can't hide. So I have respect to them for that. As far as the media, I am challenged that there still isn't a balance. I perceive, this is just my opinion, that the powers that be in media seem to be still more comfortable, or our queerness as Black men in particular is more palatable if it's encased in hyper femininity. And
Mm.
I would definitely like to see a balance in that, to see, to your point, of seeing more of us who are like you or like me, or like the whole rainbow spectrum of how we can present.
Mm-hmm. A hyper femininity with queer spaces and hyper masculinity with black spaces. And if you're a black man, that disparity definitely messes with your head. Yeah. And especially considering how black queer or queerness in general, but especially black queerness has been so stereotyped and demeaned for a long time. Nobody wants to be associated with that. Hence why I do what I do to try to revamp people's minds. Like, no, we got it messed up. That's not what queerness is. That's not what blackness is. Just be as natural as you can be. Because if you are anything less than your natural self, you automatically fail.
I agree. And then there's, I think, the flip side of that, especially these days with online dating, and that's the norm, it seems, these days, to initially meet somebody for romantic interludes or whatever you want to call it. But there's the flip side of, having to, I think, battle the perception that we are all, at least maybe if we don't present that way publicly, that we're expected to be that way in the bedroom. As if you're not hyper masculine, then you're not a real Black man.
Mm. And speaking of online dating and real black men, how do you feel about the fetishization of the black man? Especially, and I think that there's levels to this fetishization, by the way. It's always like a dark skin, masculine, top black man. It's always like on top of the food chain, and you're just cornered into a box, and you're not allowed to be anything but that box itself. And I'm not saying that other races are not fetishized as well. I'm sure Asian men are fetishized in their own way. White men are also heavily fetishized, and so on and so forth. But how do you feel about that fetishization? Since we're on the topic of black queerness, how do you feel about that fetishization of the black man within the queer space?
I mean, I think it's connected to society at large. It's connected to racism. It's connected to slavery. It's connected to colonialism. It's that thing of, the thing they despise the most, they want the most secretly in some
Mm.
ways. Of course, I don't like it. It's, I think it's damaging to us overall, to our psyche, not just us as queer men, but Black men in general. This insistence upon performing a certain way, and if you don't, then you're not really a Black man.
Mm.
So, in general, yeah, it's a problem, and um, I'm not opposed to interracial dating. I'm cautious of it because of that history, because oftentimes it seems that when a non-Black person expresses interest is because they want a product and not who may be in front of them.
And this is not just a gay thing either. I feel like even in the heteronormative space, there's a lot of fetishization of even the white woman and so on and so forth. And so sad now to the point that a lot of times when I see interracial relationships, and I've been in an interracial relationship myself, but I remember a lot of times, even prior to my relationship, a lot of times when I see interracial couples, I always automatically go back to, is this even real love or anything like that? And even when I eventually got into an interracial relationship, it messed with my head. Like, is this real love, or am I conforming to that I demeaned for such a long time? But yeah, I feel like part of what I walked away from that relationship with is love the person. Love the person for who they are, not their skin, not what they represent, whatever you've been indoctrinated to believe that they represent. But love the person, take your time to connect with them, mind, body, and spirit, as opposed to just
I
settling.
agree. And I think, just very recently, meeting somebody here, a Black gay man who's in a relationship, an interracial relationship. And the thing that I like that he said is it's very much about communication, which is in any relationship, but definitely if one is in that space, and I've dated interracially, but I like how he said, if you find somebody and it feels organic and it feels healthy, because regardless of any relationship or regardless of race, I think health is the most important thing, or all of the stuff you talked about, mental health and all that stuff. But definitely communication. You have to have that talk. You have to have that talk, like, yeah, you love me, I love you, but the reality is we exist in this world, and that can influence how we um negatively navigate this thing if we don't talk about it.
Of course. Oh, Eric, I would love to continue talking with you. You seem so knowledgeable, and you are definitely a perfect person to talk about these kind of things with, because you have to understand this is not, unfortunately, not as common. Like, it's easy to get together with people and discuss literally anything, politics, sports, and the Amy's or AVMAs, whatever it's called, right? But when it comes to things that affect real life people like you and I, Black, queer, African, immigrant, that topic that literally people every day suffer as a result of, is crickets. So whenever I find people like you to discuss these things, it definitely is not only just reinforcement that we are definitely on the right path to being the catalyst for more, but like, it gives me hope. And I wish I can talk even much longer, because this is a topic that is so broad and deep, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But for the sake of not making this podcast too long, we'll definitely pick up another time. Before we leave today, do you have any message for two groups of people that are considering coming out of a closet? A young person who is considering coming out of a closet, but they don't have the drive to come out of a closet, or an older person, a much older person. It could be someone in their 60s, 70s, 80s, who think it's a bit too late for them to come out of a closet, and but they're still dealing with that internalized lack of self-acceptance, internalized homophobia, or even internalized racism. What message would you give to them before we leave?
I would say that we're all on a journey, regardless of age, and that what influences our journeys, our families, our socialization, the era that we grew up in. Accept the journey. That's what I'm still doing, is accept the particular journey I'm on, which means that I judge it less, which the less I judge it, then the means the more I'm willing to reach out and ask for help. And that it is okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
It's not a sign of weakness. Just ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness to listen to people like you who share your own experience, strength, and hope. So yeah.
Exactly. And that's exactly why we do what we do. Like I mentioned before, a lot of my topics on my platform is not just LGBTQ stuff, but I've put this on top of my table because I know that there's not a whole lot of resources out there. So I'm definitely an advocate. If you are someone who's struggling with coming out, struggling with their sexuality, struggling with social conformity, struggling with religiosity, and so on and so forth, please feel free to reach out to any one of us, myself or Eric. And I'm going to drop Eric's information down in the description box so you can reach out to him. And there's so many other people out there who are advocates and speaking up on behalf of the community. So please know that you're not alone. I know that this is heavy, and I feel it too. And I'm sure, Eric, you feel it as well, that it's a very heavy cross to carry, but it's one that is necessary and feels right for us to do it so that younger versions of myself, younger future generations don't have to go through the things that we've had to go through, so that in the future, this wouldn't even be a discussion. It would be too trivial to have to come out as gay. That's the point that we're trying to drive home. You are necessary irrespective of your race, gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining today. Of course, I'm going to put links to your platforms down below, but for verbal sake, do you want to verbally share some of your platforms where we can find you?
I think you have probably my links with Instagram for the podcast. It's Instagram is Our Black Gay Diaspora. Twitter is BLK Gay Diaspora. And then you can also email at ourblackgaydiaspora@gmail.com. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
I accept all questions and suggestions. Yeah, because it's all about dialogue and communication.
Of course. And you guys feel free to reach out to me at letstalkwithuche@gmail.com. My LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok are LTAU with Uche. Instagram is UC_images. So you can reach out to me anytime if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Eric, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good rest of your day. And until next episode, peace out.